Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. In recent weeks, it feels like cybercrime and ransomware in particular has really hit the headlines. Major attacks, including Optus and Medibank, have shown how vulnerable even our biggest companies are. The ransomware threat is growing at an alarming rate. New research from McGrathNicol Advisory shows that almost 70% of Australian businesses have suffered a ransomware attack in the last 5 years. That's up sharply from last year's figure. This morning, I'm talking to two partners at McGrathNicol Advisory, Darren Hopkins and Shane Bell, and they've also brought along a little bit of audio, which is of a criminal asking a company to negotiate over the cyber hack that just occurred. It's really fascinating listening. Darren, Shane, welcome back to Fear and Greed.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
Shane, let's start with you. When we spoke last year, the number of businesses that had experienced an attack was 31%. Now it's almost 70%, 69%, huge growth. So what's behind that increase for, one of a better term, the boom?
Thanks, Sean. Well, I think there's a few different aspects as to what's behind that. Firstly, I think Australia has very much become an attractive marketplace for cyber criminals. We're not as understated as we used to be, and so there's money to be made down here. And I think that the cybercrime groups have cottoned on to that. The second aspect, I think, is that there's just a lot more vulnerabilities in the technology that we're using globally, but certainly Australian businesses are susceptible to that. It feels like every other day the tech companies and others are publishing vulnerabilities that need to be patched. And so with an increase in vulnerabilities, increases the opportunity for an attack to occur until that vulnerability is patched. And so I think a combination of those things, as well as new entrants to the cyber crime landscape, means that the Australian businesses are feeling the brunt, I'm afraid.
Okay, Darren, let's bring you into it. Optus and Medibank are two very prominent examples in the last month or so. We've also had the Nine Group. We've had Woolworths through one of its subsidiaries. What does this tell us basically? It seems like no one is going to escape cyber crime. At least no one's immune.
That's correct. We've always said it's a matter of when, not if, an incident happens for a company. And the brands you've just mentioned are very large, and you'd expect will have good teams, good technology, budgets to get good systems in place. Yet they've all been in the press, with their own issues. I guess what it does is remind us that cybersecurity is something that every business has to continually work on. It's not something you can set and forget. And the other thing that we have to be aware of is sometimes you can't avoid an incident occurring. And as Shane just mentioned, vulnerabilities. We're seeing at the moment some zero-day vulnerabilities, which are issues that exist in technology that haven't got a patch yet. So for a while, the businesses will just remain at risk until someone finds a fix for that.
Okay, it just seems that businesses are paying, or the average ransom that businesses are paying is fairly consistent with last year, just over $1 million. But the amount that companies are willing to pay has almost doubled. Why is that?
Sean, I think we've, over the last year, gotten a lot more visibility as to the costs associated with suffering a ransomware event. And historically, I think people will have thought that the higher costs were, legal costs, forensic costs, incident response costs. But actually the greater costs are business interruption costs and some of the reputational damage, which I think is hard to quantify. And so I think the movement in what people are willing to pay is a reflection of the value that businesses put on that cost, the business interruption cost and the reputation cost. And so you're right, it's gone from, $600,000 or so that people are willing to pay up to $1.2 million. And so I think that's just an indicator for us as to what the price tag is for businesses that are suffering this and are potentially considering paying the ransom.
But it just seems that it's like an option of finding the criminals as opposed to paying the ransom doesn't seem to be an option.
Yeah, I think that's really difficult. I mean, finding the criminals, I think there's a lot that's required globally to sort of get behind that and disrupt that cybercrime marketplace. And I don't think it would be fair to say that global law enforcement agencies aren't working on that. But I guess the immediacy of the situation for that organisation in that moment is a really telling to pay or not to pay equation. And we know from the statistics that still 8 out of 10 businesses appear to be paying the ransom. And so that's still quite high, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously that's attractive for criminal elements, because 80% of the time they're getting paid.
It's a self-perpetuating economy, that's for sure.
Stay with me. We'll be back in a minute. I'm talking to Darren Hopkins and Shane Bell, partners at McGrathNicol Advisory. Darren, can you talk me through the timeline of a ransomware attack? And once you do that, we're just going to play a little bit of audio, which is a voicemail left on an executive's phone by a ransomware group. And not the voice you'd expect, really. But first off, Darren, just take me up until the time, what normally happens up until the time the phone call arrives.
We could probably have a whole podcast just on this one question, I think. If I think back to, I guess, the average ransomware or extortion event that we tend to deal with, often these things start well before the group that you're dealing with was in your network, and they may actually start with a broker. And what a broker is a group that will be the one that finds a way to get into your network and find the user account, so the credentials that they will then use to actually get in. And that's actually part of this life cycle. They will pull together you and the credentials to get into your network, and then they'll sell that on the darknet to another group. And then we get an organised crime group, which will likely be the ones that will do the extortion or the ransomware, and then they'll start their part, which is gaining access to your system. One of the first things they try to do is get your data, exfiltrate information that's going to be of value, because ultimately that's what you're being extorted against. They will also try to be persistent, which means that they can come and go into your network as they see fit, get some more credentials and more accounts so that they've got access in there. And generally the last thing that would happen is that you'd find out that there's been someone in your network. And then that could be either a ransom note, it could be a text message to an individual, an email, or a voice message left on someone's phone. Or worst case scenario, it could be that your whole network is encrypted and then everything goes offline and then you've got to go and deal with that. And that leads to, I guess, to that particular voice message, which was from a job that we had actually worked on. And it was interesting to see that mechanism for letting someone know.
Let's hear it.
Brett, hi. My name is Melissa. I'm calling you from Quantum Group. As I understand, you right now or your management are trying to figure out what happened with your infrastructure. I will explain that for right now, 45 servers are encrypted and 464 computers are also encrypted, and more than 500 gigabytes of private and internal data of your company has been stolen. So my recommendation is to come for a negotiation, and you should do this at nearest time. You have so less time to come for negotiation. On the encrypted computers or laptops, you will find the information how to get in our chat room. So we are waiting for your management, so please take this message and inform, because for right now, as I see, no one phone is working on your website. So as I understand, right now you have big problems. And the best way how to resolve this issue is to come for a negotiation. We are waiting. Thank you.
Darren, it's pretty chilling.
It's pretty direct, isn't it? And, Melissa has quite clearly said that, she's there to help. And all you need to do is to contact her through your chat room and negotiate. And I guess it's something we're not used to, which is a human element to what we're dealing with, which is a cybercrime, and we are just dealing with people.
Shane, bringing you into it, I mean, your study shows that negotiation is now less likely to have taken place than in the instance we just heard where the woman wanted to negotiate. Why is negotiation happening less? Doesn't it work?
Yeah, I think there's a few factors to this, Sean. I think the first is people make the decision pretty early now to negotiate or not to negotiate. I mean, there's a few reasons why you might negotiate, not necessarily because you want to pay the ransom, because if you enter into that negotiation, you can get a bit of intelligence yourself about the information that may have been stolen or the way that group got access to your environment. So there can be some valuable pieces of information that come from that. But I think the decision as to whether to negotiate or not is made pretty quickly. I think the other contributing factor is that on the cybercrime side of things, some of the demands are actually considered reasonable, if I put it that way. So, I mean, on big, sophisticated and significant events, I think the ransom will be quite high and a negotiation might get it down. But for some of the other ransomware events that we see, the ask isn't actually that high. And so that decision to pay or not to pay might actually be a pretty quick decision for people to make. So I think all of that contributes to the statistics that we're seeing around the propensity for organisations to enter into the negotiation.
But can you trust the person you pay, even if it's $10,000 or $20,000 and you think as a cost of business I need to do this, can you trust the person who stole your data?
I think that's really difficult. My personal answer to that question, Sean, is no, but I think people rationalise that decision differently, and certainly there is threat intelligence that's available now that talks to, I guess, how reliable some of these cybercrime groups are at sticking to their word, i.e. if you pay me some money, I'll delete the data, I won't publish it or sell it on marketplaces. And so I guess with a grain of salt, you can maybe believe that, but my personal view would be, I mean, you're dealing with a criminal, right? So, so I think that trusting what they're saying would be pretty difficult in my view.
And when they pay the money, let's say it is $10,000, do they know where it goes? Is it Bitcoin? How do they pay it?
It is paid via crypto. One of the things that we have seen that's a little different in the current landscape is that the ask is now at the moment a dollar figure rather than a crypto.
Inflation is killing the hackers.
Maybe inflation's getting in there. Maybe the volatility of the crypto market is something that these cybercrime groups aren't willing to ride the wave of. So the ask will be a dollar figure, and then it'll be sort of calculated at the time that there's an agreement to pay. But still, crypto is the chosen currency of choice.
Okay. What about Darren? What about insurance in all this? Do the insurers play a role?
Absolutely. If you've got cyber insurance, there's a few things that you're actually seeking coverage on. The first one is help in the event that you have an incident. And an insurance policy in this space gives you access to experts. It gives you access to lawyers who are skilled at dealing with these issues, digital forensic and incident responders like Shane and myself to bring a team in there and help you respond to the issue. Maybe communication experts to help you with those comms pieces when something's gone wrong. So in the first instance, you get access to big teams to help you get through this quickly. And at the same time, you're also getting coverage for your loss to a degree. So, we mentioned before the amount of interruption that occurs in one of these events, and that is covered as well. And, and in some cases, if you're making a ransom payment, that's covered. So, the insurer has a lot of areas that they support you on.
Okay. I mean, you mentioned the public relations exercise there. Is it a good idea to come out quickly, as arguably Optus did, or do you perhaps wait a few days because you're not really sure what's going on? I mean, you're in a rock and a hard place there. Medibank came out and was criticised for coming out too late. But at the end of the day, you're probably not sure what's going on, Darren.
And look, this is something that in this last month, I think has been debated and is changing the way many businesses would approach how they communicate in one of these instances. The expectation, I think, is that you come out quickly and you're very honest and open in that communication. At the same time, one thing that you've never really wanted to do is tell people that maybe we've lost your identity when you don't know if that's the case, because that can actually be causing them harm, psychological harm in the instance that they think that they're now at risk. So getting that balance is really hard. I think at this point, you've got to come out early and say something, and say it in a way that is honest. And in some cases, you just have to say, look, we just don't know yet. But what we want to do is tell you what we do know. And that's something that I think we're all sort of coming to grips with at the moment.
Okay, Shane, presumably everyone is at risk now. I mean, I would think the banks and retailers and people who have huge amounts of data would be more likely to be at risk, but is that not true?
Yeah, well, I think, unfortunately, Sean, if you're connected to the internet, you're at risk. Now, I think there's obviously degrees of risk. We talk about that in the cybersphere as confidentiality and integrity and availability. So if you have a large amount of data that's confidential in nature, then that will probably increase your risk profile. And that's, someone like the Optus scenario. Integrity. So if you've got data that the accuracy of that information is really quite critical, then that can put you at risk as well, not necessarily the volume of that data, but the accuracy. And availability, that becomes less about a data risk and more about, system availability and those types of things. So I think there's ways that you can calculate what your cyber threat risk profile might be, but at a base level, if you have a digital supply chain and you're connected to the internet, then you're in play.
Okay, Darren, final question. What should a company be doing right now to prepare for the risk of cyber hacking or ransomware?
Well, as I said, expect it will happen. So the first thing you should be doing is actually having a plan to respond to these incidents. Building resilience to cyber takes some time, but you can absolutely have a plan and know how to respond. And the one thing that we would encourage all businesses to sort of think about is make sure the basics are still in play. Like, do you have backups and could you respond to an event if it occurred? You just don't want to be left in the situation where you only have one outcome, which is possibly having to deal with and pay a threat actor group for what they've done.
Darren, Shane, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
That was Darren Hopkins and Shane Bell, cyber partners at McGrathNicol Advisory and supporters of this podcast. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.